Welcome back, everybody. BPRadiant here, or Brett, here to drop a lot of decks on you today. So, with the release of Jumpstart Horizons, I am going to accelerate this a little bit because I think I want to change the format of how I'm doing this, but I did set the goal of changing the challenge for one deck of every color pair, and I completed everything. So today, I'm going to drop 13 decks. It's going to be a little bit of a long one, so we're going to try to hurry through. One for every 3-color pair, one 4-color pair, 5-color, and colorless. So with that ado, quick heads up, if you haven't seen it or if you're looking for some Brawl decks to try out for different color combinations before you kind of compete for this, I do have a video on my channel that I'll have a link below for standard Brawl decks that are now free to play outside of 2 uncommons for standard Brawl, basically the new decks we got yesterday. So I'm going to have a link to that below. If you like the content as well, please just feel free to give me a follow, a like, any kind of comment. Let me know what your favorite deck was. We're going to get into this. Okay, so this deck is, do you want to go fast? Do you want to hit your opponent? Do you want to have haste? And do you want to play big, fiery, meaty dragons? If so, Darigaaz Reincarnated is for you. Sure, 7 mana, 7/7. It's not anything to write home about. It's a good card. Flying Trample Haste is really nice. It allows you to kind of just be there for the top end. And then if you would die, get 3 egg counters instead, exiled it, and then he essentially has to spend 3 to come back in and start beating face, which can just be inevitability with Trample and Haste. Your opponent has to have instant speed reaction move with him. And so we did a couple things with this. First, we went Dragon Tribal with it. I love dragons. I love playing them. I'm probably going to try doing even a mono red dragon at some point with the new Sarkhan. So I try to put in, we've got our Sarkhans that deal with dragons. We've got, other dragons that just are like really cool. And then we wanted to put in a few things that have haste. So we're running like Inferno, we're running Glorybringer, Goldspan, we're running Questing Beast. Like we have things that have haste that will get in and will just finish the job as quick as possible. That's the goal at the very least. Is this is going to be kind of a mid-range aggro list that we are kind of focusing on our opponent. Cool, you answer my board, I'm going to drop something else. I have threat after threat after threat. Ways to bring back threats, way to remove your threats for blockers. We are going to be running a couple of what I'm going to call the more interesting cards. So first off, Perforus, fantastic card. It allows us to effectively, ideally we play him like turn 4, turn 5. The turn after, we can then really start to cheat out some stuff. The best one I've gotten was a Perforos into, I paid 3 for Beledros for Leatherbloom, and then I played 3 for Old Gnawbone, and then I untapped with Beledros and ended up getting into like a Lothless or something, and I think I cast Draxeth or something after that. I was just like all the expensive dragons in one turn to get a swing in. My opponent's just like, wait, what? I never thought about how good Perforos was going to be with Beledros, because like, we're not, with Perforos as well, it kind of just fits the theme of the deck that we're not living to see tomorrow. We are pedal to the metal as fast as we can get out of here. We want to win. With that in mind, a couple of other interesting cards. I think Tuk Rebel Fort is also Rebel Fort and Perforos being haste enablers, as well as with Zariel, become incredibly important for the few times. So what we want to do is we have one of those out. We actually want to hold some of our haste options like Inferno, Glorybringer, Goldspan, Darigaaz, for our non-haste options, so that we can try to play around if they have board reps and stuff with our innate haste enablers. And so that's just gonna be something you want to kind of keep an eye out for. One other thing to note as well, I love Crux of Fate. It is a one-sided board wipe for the most part. Live it, love it, learn it. I've put this in a lot of decks that can just sometimes work against dragon decks. I have not seen any yet, so I'm just really excited. And then, of course, we do include sometimes you can live the dream of the Dragonstorm too. Basically, you can grab Lathless and Terror the Peaks, and like, there you go, boom. You already just made a 5 damage to their face with sequencing it Lathless Terror there. And then you have a board presence from there, getting rid of a blocker to face. And then you also can, like, if you get one more, if you can manage to get a Dragonstorm to 3, Lathless into Terror into, like, Bladewing, if you have a dragon in your graveyard, can just, like, combo kill them right out. So Dragonstorm is actually, like, a win con in the deck. Assuming you can get out a couple cheap spells like that, or if you have Beledros in there to untap to make things happen. he is really a key part of the deck if you can find him. Gorgeous art, Rim Swanland, big fan. We'll be trying to make him work as well in like his own commander deck. But we'll see. One thing that I think the deck is kind of weak to, we can get ran over by aggro decks. We don't have the most creatures early game. We're kind of relying on a lot of utility creatures to reduce cost for dragons or increase mana with like Magda, Dragon Servant, and then things like Sarkhan Fireblood or Dragon Speaker Shaman, like ways to kind of accelerate into our dragons. So we do best if we're able to punch up into other mid-range decks, or if the aggro deck has a bit of a slow start and we can start dropping dragons as early as turn 4. That's the goal. And so the reason you might be asking, well, there's another really important Jund Dragon. Well, I kind of felt like if we went with him, we'd want to go with more of a sacrifice sub theme. And I just, when I was starting to look at it, I was like, I want to diversify. I think we're going to see a lot of lists for him. And until we get like Karthus or something like that, this was the other dragon I wanted to run. Because you know what? He's got a bunch of dragons behind him, and that's we're going to play dragons. They're going to have other dragons with them. And that is the deck. Of course, we are running things like Desperate Binding the Old Gods, because I think that removal while ramping us is really good when we have like a lot of big haymakers like this. Yeah, that is the deck. Our first deck today is going to be Alela, Artful Provocateur. Her name's really hard. I just call her Alela. And her main theme is that when you cast an artifact or enchantment spell, you create a 1/1 blue fairy, and then other creatures with crawling get +1/+0. So I tried to kind of theme around getting as many fairies out as I could. I did try to put in every kind of good fairy I could as well. A couple things that were interesting. Fairy Formation's a very fun card. We of course put in where did it go? Oh, Shine Chaser. Like, we put in every fairy that we realistically felt like we could. We also put in a couple things that synergizes with the fact she made tokens. Things like Cathar's Crusade can buff everything, and only Procession will double the amount of tokens she makes. We put in a Temet to make some of the tokens unblockable. And we also try to find enough artifacts and enchantments without leaning too heavily into one or the other that I felt would give us good card advantage and overall kind of like increase the value of the deck. And with that, I kind of thought things like Rogue class actually feed out really well, giving your stuff menace, as well as then you can start generating value and card advantage from your opponent's deck using the 3rd level up, which I think is incredibly good in the deck. I also thought that things like Empyrean Eagle, Phyrexian Arena both had good synergy with letting you draw more cards, buffing your flying units. Dramatic Finale, of course, since we have a lot of creature tokens to buff it, and you'll get a creature token every time they kill Alela. It's going to happen a lot. So in this deck, when I've been playing it and playtesting it, my recommendation is try to have one of these 1 or 2 drop enchantments, and try your best not to play Alela until you can play Alela and then immediately cast one of those enchantments to at least get some value. Also, of course, we have Rankle in here. He's another one of the fairies I was missing. We are trying to run... We do actually have more lands than we do in other decks, and a lot of them are going to come into play tapped. So, of course, we are running Field of the Dead. In this deck, there's one thing I could change that I didn't really want to do it just yet. So we're actually gonna make that change right now, because I didn't think about it until this exact moment. We are gonna do Snowlands because they count as a different land for things like Field of the Dead. Now I do want to point out that I would make some adjustments to the deck. The land count I've got here with some more MDFCs in the future. Unfortunately, after having kind of started to make that process happen, some of these decks have already been made for a week or two, and I just didn't have time to go back and adjust everything. So a couple of interesting things to note that I think are actually really important. First off, Black Market is just cash money in this deck. You're going to be casting Alela and a lot of stuff a lot of the time, so being able to just get a couple creatures that are going to die, trade, whatever, and then being able to cast your Alela more and more. Worst case scenario, every time they kill your Alela, this is half the commander tax back to pay for it every time. Which I think is always pretty big. Another thing to note with Layla that I think is incredibly strong is actually One with the Stars. So depending on the deck you're facing, if you're facing something that has a lot of removal for Layla, you can actually One with the Stars your own commander. And in this case, it would trigger her ability, and then she would then be something that it'd have to have enchantment removal to get rid of, and then you're basically just using her to get the 1/1 blue fairy creature tokens, give them flying. So in matchups where you don't need the lifelink or death touch, or if they have a lot of removal, One with the Starsing while they're tapped out can actually lead to some incredible blowouts. Probably the best example of that is when I played against Mono Red. That determined they tapped out and had 8 mana. I was being very careful not to play Alela into it. I was taking quite a bit of damage, but then that allowed me to keep Alela on the battlefield while I started dropping everything else. overall, I'm really excited with this deck. You do want to try to start playing Alela and then casting 2 or 3 things. You are kind of playing this mid-range tempo deck. With things at the top end like Shattered Silverquill can potentially give all your tokens a buff or draw you cards, and then River's Rebuke can also open the way. The deck did perform pretty well with me so far. Right now, I believe it was 3-2. And so I was pretty excited with that. And the 2 games were against meta decks. Like, you're going to struggle against things like Bruvac, Mill with this deck, because you don't have a ton of answers to Mill. And then the other loss was into 5-color Rainbow Bridge control. And I couldn't stop the Rainbow Bridge enough times. But yeah, that's the deck. I hope you guys enjoy. Next on our list is Arkady the Strategist. This is as simple as it sounds. This is a wall deck. I have a lot of fun. When I saw that we had very few options, basically just Chulane or Arkady, I figured a lot more people were going to build Chulanes, so I really wanted to build Arkady to kind of synergize with that. Plus, I've had a lot of fun with them in the past, and I really just love the idea of beating your opponent to death with things like walls. So the deck is going to be very low to the ground. You're going to want to ideally cast him and then be able to cast 2 or 3 after to start chaining together. We, of course, do have backup plans if he starts getting too high in high alert. As well as being able to cast Huatli to gain some life and keep on the defensive. And then we also have Assault Formation as another way to attack from being a defensive area. We did, of course, still include Chulane because, we're casting a lot of creature spells and he synergizes really well with that, even if we aren't using him as a primary form of the deck. We also have more card draw things like Guardian Project in there to start essentially cantripping if we can't keep Arkady out to still maintain everything going on. We do also have something that I think is incredibly good in the deck is Shaper Sanctuary. A lot of people are going to have to use targeted removal because they're not going to get a lot of combat tricks through, and this just becomes an incredible value engine when dealing with that. Like with every 3-color deck we're showing you today, of course we do have the Field of the Dead package in there. I did try to maintain a large amount of untapped lands or ways to create their lands untapped, as I believe that, it will take a little bit more to get things like Irrigated Farmland. We're trying to use everything that says Forest and Plains so that we can then use it with any of our check lands or lands that require you to view from hand. So I think it's just kind of a good call to try to do that. The package is going to be more expensive, so if you don't have the land base, you can put in the common tap lands, and that will work just as well. So I'll probably go over that again with most of the decks today. A couple things to note that I think are really interesting in the deck. We do have a couple of things that essentially turn into one-sided board wipes. The first being Slaughter the Strong. 3 mana, we basically pick our commander and nothing else has power for the most part, so we can sacrifice everything else. It gets around indestructible, it gets rid of big boards, go wide, like it's just going to be a 3 mana win more for us most of the time. And the other card we have here that's going to kind of like do that same thing is, where did it go? Dusk, here we go, sorry. It adds them together, so it's not in the 4-drop slot like I thought it was. And this is destroy all creatures power 3 or greater. Unfortunately, this does hit our Arkadies, but that's fine because in the end, it's going to hit one of our creatures, and it's probably going to hit the majority of our opponent's board. The other thing as well is that Dawn can be used after the fact to bring back all of our walls to our hand to recast. We do include a couple items, things like Coastal Piracy and Reconnaissance Mission to help us draw when we connect, because again, this deck is very tempo and it is an aggro deck. And so we are kind of trying to maintain our card draw while pressing our advantage. A couple of things we have that can kind of help us to win the game. First is Towering Titan. The fact that it gives creatures trample is really good, especially with the fact that we all have walls. It itself comes in incredibly strong. We do, of course, include Field of the Dead as a win con, with our Promise as a way to actually tutor it out from the deck, because we don't have a ton of ways. And then, of course, we are just running, bap them in the face with walls. The deck is incredibly straightforward. Unfortunately, it has not performed super well because most of the decks, 4 of the matches I played it into out of the 5 testing games, have been just straight up into control. And this playing into control or Planeswalker control, and everybody having enough answers or counterspells for the few cards, and specifically Arkadies, does mean the deck doesn't always work. So this deck is one of those ones that it's jank. I will put it purely in the jank pile. But it is incredibly fun, and honestly, outside of like the things that help your defenders attack, the deck is incredibly cheap as far as wildcards go. A lot of this is common and uncommon as far as the walls. We don't see too many, and there's a lot of fun budget options you can do instead of things like Mentor the Meek as well. There's a lot of ways to make this deck more budget friendly, but I think that for the fact that the most part, the deck is the core of the deck, which is going to be things like Arkadies, the walls, and Tetsuko Umezawa, who basically makes them all unblockable, is just going to be pretty fun to build from there. So if you have a deck you've been wanting to try out, or if you want to try this deck, you don't need to craft a lot as far as rares and mythics goes to just test out the deck to see if you like it first, which would be my recommendation. If you have to craft more than a lot of this deck, I think there's a lot of ways you can take it that makes it similar, but, you know, cheaper. And that's Arkady's. And then we have Kykar Winds Fury Storm. So what I did when I was building this deck is I took what I wanted to do with Jora, and I just made it better. This is what I wanted my Jora deck to be. I really kind of ran with the Storm theme, thinking about the fact that, you know, Kykar enables Storm to some degree by getting you to, you know, get a spirit you can add red mana for, effectively being a pseudo second Bergie in the deck. Not quite as good, but still really good. And so we do have a couple of things. So first I want to go over our enablers. First is Kykar and Bergie. They are incredibly strong enablers, allowing us to cast multiple spells in a turn. Rowan and Will are also really good at being able to reduce the cost of our spells. And not everything we're running is going to be draw, but we do have enough very cheap card selection spells and things like that to start getting the job done. A few things that I also liked noticing. First, Monk class. I liked the fact that it did decrease at least our second cost spell, allowed us to get some more card draws off, you know, maybe get like a second spell that gets into a third spell for Storm. I also like Chromatic Ori in the deck. It can enable our Kykar, Bergie, you know, all of our mana generation and things like that to then be cast in any color, which can just be an incredible boon for getting a chance to filter out our mana into different colors to get us a stronger presence. And the last thing that kind of goes towards our engine is going to be Stormkiln Artist with the Magecraft copy to create a Treasure Token. So this can really just help you go off if you manage to get any kind of Stormed combo deck off. I do see myself after Historic Horizons comes out, potentially looking into green for Temur instead, or potentially running it in an Omnath package. We'll have to see for 4-color. White's main thing it adds us is just some much better removal. Things like Time Wipe, Day of Judgment, Smothering Tithe, as well as, you know, of course, Lightning Helix and Dovin's Veto to kind of keep ourselves through the early game to help us get to the part where we can actually storm out. As for payoffs, first of all, we have our two main Stormwind cons, which is Grape Shot and Mind's Desire. These can both just help us to go off even further, as well as we have Thousand Year Storm as another engine to help us just kind of go off. Most of the time with Thousand Year Storm, we are just trying to copy one of our other Storm cards, and then Locust God is another payoff we have, allowing us to have a Flying Haste Insect every time we draw a card, and since we have a bunch of card draw, this can just help us win the game right there. Been very happy with the deck. I managed to get it Storm off 2 out of the 5 games, but still managed to win 2 others, so I'm 4-1, 2 with an actual Storm combo, 2 more by basically abusing Storm the Vault, with Kykar's Spirits to get treasure, to cast more cards main phase 2 without flipping the Vault of Cattle-Can, or using it to flip and then using that to kind of go off with like a lot of spells in one turn. I've been just incredibly happy with this deck. It has performed so well so far for me, and I still think there's ways to tweak it. Like the Loyal Warhound doesn't necessarily seem the best for me, but I do like the fact that it is an early blocker that can ramp us, which is something that the deck needs. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely areas that it can be fixed, but with the treasure theme we've got so far, with trying to storm out with that one, it has been very impressive so far. So if you liked, my last blue-red deck, you're going to love this one. This is going to be everything you want and more. Of course, with things that rolled on the thought to keep drawing us into more cards as well. If the deck can assemble its engine and you get a free turn, it's just incredibly resilient at being able to find the combo with how much synergy is in the deck. This is probably the most synergy-driven deck of the bunch. It really needs you to find some kind of part of the engine and part of the payoff, and then just hitting it really hard. We do, of course, have we've filtered through a lot of stuff. We can just overload a Minsc Mastery worst case scenario. I'll be real with you. So always kind of remember that's one of your options, and when your outs to play to is that you can kind of just go through everything you can to try to find a Minsc's and then recast again to restorm off. Since Mind's Desire is on cast trigger, Minsc's Mastery does cast, it does not copy. Oh, sorry. You may cast the copy. So I believe that works. I have not got to mess with Minsc's Mastery in Storm yet. I've just messed with Minsc's Mastery and some of the other win cons, and then cast a Mind's Desire off of all the card draw I've had. But I really love the deck. And of course, like every deck, we are running Field of the Dead because why not? We're drawing a lot of cards, we're going to hit it, and it becomes a way to kind of create creatures. And that is Nadar. Oh, Kykar, not Nadar. Kykar. Now we have Jorn, God of Winter. And of course, the other side of him is Cauldron the Rhyme Staff, which we will almost never play. I say almost because sometimes it is the right call. Into certain mill strategies or things that are going to just keep abusing Jorn being there, and you want to be able to just bring back snow permanents, which in this deck is primarily just going to be your lands, because and Draugr Necromancer really. There's nothing else like snow permanent in the deck, which could be a mistake, but this is going to be a combo deck. So basically the idea behind this is it started off as a standard deck that abused Emergent Ultimatum with the Vornaclex, a Walker, and a way to bring back, stuff. And so that no matter what they pick, you're getting the best decisions. And so what I'm going to look into here as well to kind of help with this is maybe one more recursion spell that fits in the colors, to be very similar to what what we're seeing play with other Emergent Ultimatum decks. But here the idea is you're going to play out Vornaclex, and you're going to tutor for ways to play Vornaclex Emergent Ultimatum using things like Grim Tutor, Vargoth. We have as many ways as we can to tutor for him. Shared Summons can get you him and some of the creatures that are really solid. And the idea is you want to then combo them together to then just instantly pop an Ugin or instantly, pop Kiora Sea God. And one of the ways you can do that is if you don't need to necessarily tutor, you can play one, attack with Jorn, untap all of your stuff, play the second part. And the idea there is just to get a ton of value off of that. But, we can't just play towards the late game, whatever we have here. So what are some of the early game things we're doing? We, of course, are ramping. We have Fauna Shaman as a way to tier for stuff, some counter spells. Merilated Slumber is a way we can actually do this with a lot of the fact that we're running snow lands. And this is just something that I think is really good. Another thing to note is that if with Cauldron, you can recast Merilated Slumber, as it is only a sacrifice, not an indestructible. So if they do have ways to deal with your avatar, you have a way to deal with it and keep getting it back. That's one of the few ways in which it's worth recasting on Cauldron in the late game. But the idea here is we want to get out a turn. You want to use a Goose or a Llanowar Elf, Arcane Saint, whatever we have, to make sure we've got out Jorn on turn 2 or 3. We want to swing turn 4 with 3 to 4 mana open, and we want to double spell. We want to cast, maybe we want to cultivate and then, untap into maybe we Desperate a blocker, or we want to Rain of Revelation, we'll hold this. We want to start gaining advantage by being able to attack and cast 2, 3 or 4 mana spell costs right then and there. Some of the best thing we can actually do is, Jorn attacks, cultivate, Jorn attack, we can 5-drop them. Has been just really good. Weirdly enough, if my opponent has like a Llanowar Elf or something out, or they just played a Mana Dork, you attack with Jorn after casting Cultivate, you cast Time Warp, and they're like, wait, what? And then you can then do it again with a 5 and do a 6-drop, really depending on your hand from there, and you get a lot of conceits that way. This deck is really strong, actually. It's 4-1, which I think is a pretty good for what I've seen so far. The one deck I lost to was a Cody Control, which I think that deck is just very overtuned right now anyways. But I really like it. So you're kind of running, a very simple tempo play with some of the combo finishers, as well as, the really just good cards to play in these color combos. You're going to want a Kiora Sea God. That can just win you the game. You're going to want Omniscience because it can help you cast these big cards. Coma is Coma. I have a tattoo of Jormungandr. I have to include Coma in almost every deck I can include Coma in. Blooded Weatherbloom is essentially Jorn 2 every 10 life, which I like, and can light a triple spell, which is just going to be bonkers. And then the Liliana Dreadhorde General is also another way that she's really good on her own, even without Vornaclex being in play. Yeah, that's pretty good. This is actually one of the few decks where I'm not including Field of the Dead. Everything in here except for Zagoth Triome and Command Tower and Castle Locthwain, is going to be a snowland, with the idea that we want to be untapping with as many snow permanents as we can. I've tried different numbers of them, and unfortunately it devalues Jorn himself too much to be able to run effectively. But I would put this with maybe a little more tweaking as to some of the removal aspects, I think. I don't think Nissa is probably the best call. I like her for being able to bring back like a Beledras, things like that from my graveyard. But you know, there's definitely some things you can kind of reach out for and tinker with to mess with the deck. But I would probably put this in tier 1 as far as like decks I've played that have had consistency in this format. This would probably be the best deck I think I've crafted for it today. And that is Jorn. And our next deck is going to be Nethroi, Apex of Death. Not exactly going to be an uncommon commander, but between him and Kethis, for who I was thinking of, I felt myself leaning more towards like this Nethroi mill strategy in Graveyard Recursion, because I didn't do it when I did Golgari originally, and so I wanted to kind of revisit that for a deck that I would just always have on hand. So the deck is going to include a lot of ways like Stitcher's Supplier, Skull Prophet, and Glowspore Shaman as quick ways to kind of feed into your yard so that you can have creatures in when Nethroi mutates and you can bring back stuff. So of course with that, we've included some creatures that I think are just really good targets for Nethroi's mutate. First, Shenna says his Legacy is really solid. It's going to be a 0/0 that just comes back for free. So it will not cost any of what you have. It itself can get fairly big. It's not a huge power piece, but it's just a fairly nice, solid piece to have. Carry and Grab as well, being 0 power, can be something that comes back fairly easily. I like Tristani Discordant because it comes back for only 1 of your 10 power and then creates soldiers that can be mutated onto if they kill Nethroi, as well as buffs your entire board and just creates a bunch of blockers for you for free. I also like Grakamos Skyclave Ravager as a 0/0. It's another free thing you can kind of get. Fabro Elder is another free card you can get that is very impactful and can ramp you, 2 to 3 colors then. Multani as well as a 0/0 that doesn't cost anything, that comes back and is going to be, probably at least a 5 or a 6 drop at that point. And you can also get it back from your graveyard without the Nethroi if you need to by returning lands. I like things like Azoni because it synergizes as well if you have anyways. You're going to get more insects. You can sacrifice creatures to gain life, draw a card to stop exile effects, and comes back at 2 power. Perukranos is a 0/0 that comes back for free. We have a lot of things like that. Golgari Raiders is a 0/0 that comes back with haste and counters. It can also come out earlier. Toski's only coming back for 1, but is incredibly impactful. World Shaper comes back for 3. This is probably something you're probably not going to bring back with Nethroi unless you have to. But this is there to kind of get a lot of the lands that you're milling back, which I thought was really good. And of course, we have a self-mill strategy and a go-wide strategy. So of course, we're grabbing Sir Conrad because, why wouldn't we? Because we're going to be putting creatures in the graveyard. We want to be able to hit them for that extra damage. We are running our Promised Tutor for our Field of the Dead. Spider Spawning can also count the number of cards in our graveyard, which is really nice. This can give us an incredible reach threat or go wide strategy. It's the deck is just kind of like super small creatures to kind of build upon each other. Blood Earth is another one. Totally forgot about that. I've been really happy. Cards like Death's Oasis have been really nice as well because I really liked the idea of playing this, and then you start getting your 4-drop into a 3-drop into a 2-drop and a 1-drop that refills your yard, maybe ramps you, has some kind of effect on it, and just giving you more recursive value has been really good, and the life gain can be really solid in certain matchups. I also try to include Binding the Old Gods and Death Sprout, 2 cards I think that fit Golgari really well and give you ramp in addition to removing your opponent's creatures, which I will never discount as being not just amazing. The deck is performed really well. It is 3-2, which out of 5 games isn't a fantastic win rate, but like the deck has felt very strong even in its losses because it's very resilient. Unless you're playing a deck, the only deck I felt weak-ish to was Brawl Mono Blue Counter, which just you're going to come into, and I just, we're playing a lot of big plays or small pieces that eventually get out-tempoed, and as long as he keeps counter-upping for things like Uriel Maiden, Villagers Witherbloom, Nethroi, like things that are going to be our really impactful plays, we don't have a lot of options, which really is just unfortunate. But the deck has been really good. I think that there's some small things I would do. I did include things like Find for Find Finality, either for whatever, getting 2 cards back, Unburial Rights to bring back from our graveyard. I thought I put one more in there. I guess I didn't. I thought I had one more way to bring back from our graveyard, but that's something else I would probably recommend is some more ways to bring back from the graveyard. It's the only thing I'm kind of like, I want more ways outside of the commander, but I guess with the commander having it, it's less important. But this is going to play like a very simple Nethroi Apex of Death deck. I did not put a ton of actual mana dorks as far as creatures in here. I felt like they were just going to grum up the works, and I tried to go instead for more of like a land-based strategy or artifact-based because they're going to be less susceptible to a lot of the removal I'm seeing in the format right now. And that's Nethroi Apex of Death. All right, now to round out, we have So I'm hesitant to call it jank because it's actually right now it's 5-0 for some reason. I think it's probably just because it's being matched against really weak decks right now. But I'm really happy with it. This is Minsc Beloved Ranger Hijack Tribal. Well, hijack / giant tribal. There's not a lot of giant synergy, but I liked the idea of putting giants in here for the few things that do have giant payoff. So the biggest one is we are running every various way we can of hijack cards, which is gain control of a creature, untap it, gets haste. We're going to steal your creature, we're going to attack you with it. You're either going to take the damage and try to think you're going to get it back, or you're going to block it, we're going to trade you anyways, trade with whatever you're blocking. And then before we have to give it back to you, know what we're going to do? You know what Minsc's ability here does? We can turn it into a 0/0 and kill it just for free. No mana needed. And yeah, it is as goofy as it sounds. It really messes with creature-based strategies. It really messes with things that have like a creature that, you know, might have indestructible. I've taken a Toski, gotten a swing with it. They think, oh, nobody, we're going to get it back. And then I'm like, so I basically took the Toski, made it into like a 5/5 trampler, because it's something that had on it. It does damage, and then I sack it immediately to make it 0/0. And it was brutal. I loved it. I was having a lot of fun. And this deck, I'd imagine as an opponent, would just be like infuriating to play against. And you know what? I'm okay with that. It doesn't really have blue, so if you're trying to play a deck that has like a lot of jank potential to it and can really just keep your opponent from like having a ton of fun or getting to keep a creature-based strategy without just crafting board wipes constantly, take their stuff. Play Minsc. Take their stuff, hit them with it, give it back. Don't give it back. But a couple things to know, since he does turn it into a giant, we did include two things that kind of synergize well with that. So there are two main things with that. First is Rumcloak Giant. We can turn any of our other utility creatures into 1/1s that are giants before we cast off, so that they are not destroyed. That includes he can turn himself into a giant as well, so it's very important to remember that. One other thing we note that is kind of going to synergize the giant strategy is going to be Calamity Bearer. If a giant source deals damage to a permanent player, it deals double that damage to that permanent player instead. So it's just kind of important to kind of know, you know, once you've got this, you've got other ways besides Minsc to stuff, though. We have things like Fling. We have things like Thud. We have the Giant that also flings when it attacks, Circling Flinger. You know, we want ways to get rid of the stuff we've gotten. We can Transmog the creature we've gotten to get more if we don't want to transmog an opponent's creature. Other ways we have to steal for a little bit of more than just a single target. We can also use Delana to copy the creature we stole once we attacked. We do have things like Captivating Crew to try to do it on a creature once we've had enough mana. And with Selvala and some of the big giants we have, it's not too terribly important. We can also use things like Lorehold Command as removal and then sacrificing the permanent to draw cards. I've been incredibly happy with this deck so far. You know, you did see it as well with Arkady, that a couple things in as well. So do I bust destroying creatures toughness 4 or greater? We can change toughness 4 creatures so that they are below 4, even if they're a giant. For the turn after we do this, we can also use Dusk to destroy all creatures power 3 or greater. We can also reduce the power that way, and that's just like one quick way we can do to get around our own board wipes. And I think that's been incredibly good so far with the deck. It's really just been something that's been really frustrating for opponents to play through. I've gotten a lot of ropers and things like that after I've like taken their 3rd or 4th creature in a row and then sacked it. And the best part about it is that Minsc can just do that as soon as he comes down. So worst case scenario, if you need to, you can play Minsc main phase 2, and they've got to have instant speed in response to the Boo trigger to kill him. Once Boo's resolved, you can just immediately kill. So yeah, the deck has been incredibly fun so far. It's not what I expected when I first built it, because originally I was trying to build a giant tribal, and then I noticed during testing with another deck, I ran into a Minsc deck that just used a Crow in Wars, the only steel card they had, and then killed it after, and I completely made me forget the fact that that would work. And so it's just been opened my eyes, to say the least. Yeah, I hope you guys steal your opponent's stuff and then kill them with it. That's the deck. We are going to continue our journey through white with Kaalia Zenith Seeker here. Now this deck is Angel Tribal. I know I'd mentioned that briefly back when we were doing our Boros video, and I felt that a lot of the black angels added to it, and Kaalia getting a synergize with that as well to be able to tutor for an angel when it comes to battlefield. That is not to say that we aren't including any dragons or demons, because, you know, getting a tutor for those free is always good. So we did include a couple of you know, what I would call some of the big ones. So Rakdos the Showstopper can be a board wipe and has been probably one of the best demons I think I've ever put in a deck ever, because he's just really good when you're behind at stabilizing, since he himself is a 6/6 flying trample for 6, which can then start building on the beat. And then usually he'll clear, you know, at least one creature. You know, you're still playing with a little bit of the coin flippy nature, but I've been really happy with him. Nightmare Shepherd as well allows us to bring our angels back, get some of our ATB effects, some of our angel buffing. We don't have a ton of recursion from the graveyard, so it's just really solid. And then as for dragons, of course, we have Goldspan Dragon, allows us to keep the ramp up. We do have a little bit of a treasure synergy since we are in black-red, and with some of the white cards as well that create treasure, like Smothering Tithe. This just allows us to power out a lot of cards very quickly when we have that treasure synergy. As far as what I would say is super important to run, personally, I have really liked getting to have a Bishop of Wings or a Righteous Valkyrie early on. They've both allowed me, because fun fact about Righteous Valkyrie, I was actually very hesitant at first, but the fact that Kaalia is a cleric and most of our other cards are cleric as well. Things like Dream Devourer is a cleric, Bishop of Wings is a cleric. There's one more cleric that surprised me. That's not super important right now. But the idea is that it just made it to where it was like just that much of a better synergy. Getting to, you know, start gaining that life and getting closer to that +2/+2 buff is just really nice. Even if there's not like a ton of life gain outside of the Valkyrie and things like our Baneslayer and Lyra. Of course, we are kind of running as many good angels as we could, so of course we still put in things like Valkyrie Harbinger, since we do have somewhat of a life gain sub-theme, or at least, you know, this card is generally good on its own in an angel package, since it will attack and gain 4 to get its own trigger. And then I also like Angelic Guardian, since if we do come into big versus big, a lot of our stuff does have vigilance, and the giving indestructible when it attacks can make our opponent not be able to combat trick us out, which I've always been a big fan of. And then one thing that can be incredibly good with the Kaalia Zenith is that we also have the Maskwood Nexus, which then turns everything in our deck into changelings and lets Kaalia tutor for 3 cards, any 3 creatures that she sees, since they'll be an angel, a demon, and a dragon, which I've always liked. I think it's just a very strong ability. And then, of course, it does allow some of our angel synergies, things like Youthful Valkyrie will trigger on everything, and then of course Starhand Aspirant will give everything -2 to the casting cost, and all in all, I've been pretty big fan of that card so far. I do think Smothering Tithe is probably the MVP of the deck. If you can get it out early, it really just helps to, nobody really pays the 2, which I think is incredibly, will change as people get more used to the format. Like with every 2-color deck, we are of course running a Fill of the Dead, because, you know, why are we not in 3-color decks? And then one thing I liked that kind of has also been really good, there's a lot of artifact combo decks going around. So I did put out Blot Out the Sky as a way to keep our creatures intact, but get rid of all non-creature and online permanents, because there just happens to be a lot of them right now. And we are able to kind of ramp out. Worst case scenario, this also can give us just like 2 or 3. If we need to get out fairly early, they can start blocking and saving us till we can get to that end game, or they can also be some of the aggressiveness we need to close out the game faster. I've been really happy with this deck. If there's one thing I have to be a little hesitant about, is that our card advantage isn't fantastic. Since we are running a very low amount of demons and dragons, we really are just getting 1 card off of Kaalia every time, and she usually bites it pretty quick, which I think is a mistake by most players, since you can then just recast her to retutor. But what do I know? Of course, you know, we just don't have a ton of card advantage because of the way we built the deck, trying to build off of playing things. We do still have things like Bag of Holding, Phyrexian Arena, Share the Spoils, you know, ways to draw cards like Eye of Vecna, and, you know, all that. But I do think that that's probably the weakness of this deck, and would be, if I had to pivot out of something, that would be what I would pivot. But this is Kaalia. The deck is incredibly expensive, but I would put this probably at solid B tier. Maybe you want to lean a little less into angels, more you want to put more into the dragons and demons in there too, to make it a little easier. Or if you want to find some more of the cheap cost 3, 4, maybe 5 drops to put in with them. You know, certainly that is a way to change how the deck operates just a little bit. But I think the deck can go in a lot of ways, but I've been very happy with it, and I hope you will too. I have to preface this one that somebody who had saw my posts on Reddit asked if I could do pirates for one of my 3-color decks. I was already working on like a nickel bolus control deck with just nickel bolus, like all of them. And I decided to pivot it because, you know what, I had some wild cards to burn. And I was like, sure, I'll build Admiral Beckett Brass and try to go for it. This deck is Interesting. So a lot of the pirates are very aggro focused. So it is the aggro deck of the 3-color decks I built. It is really tough to win. I'm going to be real with you on this one. The deck is fun. If you control most of the parts, I do recommend trying it out. You can really get under a lot of other mid-range or control decks as long as they don't drop board wipes. But really, the deck has been just an incredibly fun ride to get out, 1, 2, and a 3-drop. And then you can actually attack without having the Beck Brass play and then play Beck Brass for your end step and get it in that way. We, of course, did try to include a lot of pirates that have evasion in some way, as well as a way to give all of our creatures menace for another way to give evasion. And so this kind of just became the meme deck. And so I tried to put everything that had pirate to do with it, or things that were like pirate themed. So like one of our removal is Fiery Cannonade, because it actually synergizes with our pirates, can get us in there. I tried to put in Fell Flagship of our pirates. So we have like 3 or 4 different pirate themed anthems with Admiral Rebecca Brass, Fell Flagship, our Icon of Ancestry. We have Heraldic Banner as well, can give a lot of our stuff a buff. And I've been really happy with the deck. It is like 1 and 4, so it is a fairly weak deck, and it kind of just came down to whatever I was playing against. You don't really have a top end because none of the pirates are really top end focused. Now there is a way you could probably change this to more of a controlling strategy, but I really wanted to play around with like, I'm going to play pirates and I'm going to board your ship, as they say. We of course went for a treasure sub theme because I felt like, what is pirates without treasure? And so I tried to really, once I learned that the deck wasn't going to perform to the way I wanted it to, in a way that I think Rebecca Brass in Commander, in multiplayer, where you get more of a chance to develop a board, can. In 1v1, people are more wary of them being hit. So I decided to kind of just really lean into the theme as hard as I could here, and even put in things that just give us treasure tokens. So we have Revel in Riches is our alternate win condition. Because, honestly, we're going to be trading with creatures a lot. We do have ways to destroy creatures. We have ways to create treasures. So it's important to kind of know, if you've got Revel in Riches, you can actually play to that as an out. I have not gotten it to work just yet. I haven't drawn it in any of my games I've played with the testing, but it is there. I've done the math, like we have enough to really make it work. As for things like Trove of Temptation, to make our opponent attack into us is available as well. Can get one of their blockers, can give us a treasure token. In a 1v1 scenario where we're playing an aggro deck, we're super on board for them to kind of attack into them, because we're probably just going to try to race them as fast as we can anyways. So this is the quickest one. I mean, honestly, it's pirates. What else can they say? Now for a deck that I was incredibly hyped for, and that after going through all the historic Jumpstart spoilers, I wish I'd waited on. But having seen a ton of Aluna Apex of Wishes, I wanted to build a different Timber deck, as it's my favorite color combo, and I'm really hoping we get like Riku and Animar at some point, because they are 2 of my favorite commanders, and Tet would even be fine too. And so I wanted to build Omnath Elementals, because I played it a lot when it was in Standard. It got me to... I think it was the first deck got me to Diamond, back before it was like, I actually felt like I could do there consistently with other decks. And I had a lot of fun with it, and it's the same way here. So you're playing a lot of elementals, ideally good ones. Unfortunately, we are kind of limited on the elementals we have. We don't have all the Modern Horizons elementals coming in just yet, just some of them that are good. This deck will only get better with the relaunch of that. And ideally what, we want to do is play 1 or 2 and then get an Omnath out and start playing lands. So we have the deck basically split into 2 different parts. We have the elementals, so that he has elemental synergy when he enters the battlefield. Ideally, you're taking off some kind of key piece they have, or ramp or something like that, or even kind of putting it in the late game to bap him in the face for damage to try to close it out. And then we also have ways to deal with the second trigger, which is we put in lands into play so you can just draw cards. You make your elementals bigger and you're drawing cards. So for that case, this is one of the few decks I did not include a Llanowar Elf in. I don't know if that's a mistake or not yet. I decided to go with Lotus Cobra, Leafkin Druid, and Tangled Florahedron, as 2 of these are elementals, and the other one will synergize with the fact we're putting in a lot of actual lands into play, which is why we have a little bit more of a higher basic count than others. In this one as well, it was very important to me that I put as many untapped mana sources as I could, with our Field of Dead, of course. With the only really tapped land that's going to come into play most of the time is going to be anything we pick up with Evolving Wilds, Field of Passage, or where did it go? Littjara Mirror Lake, and that's because this we want to keep some things in creep copies. We have things like Double Major, Littjara, Repudiate, Replicate, as ways to kind of create a copy, as well as Reflection of Littjara. Because if we can manage to create, 2, 3 Risen Reefs, it's an engine, man. It will really help us go off. And the same is true if we create multiple of our Cavaliers. Any of the Cavaliers as having a clone of them for the ETB was really nice. Ancient Green Warding, making our lands trigger multiple times. All of these are just really good. So of course we have things like Moria in here. He's also a Changeling. But we did keep a little bit of a sub-theme of that. Mask Nexus in here as well is for most tribal decks, because it takes the few of our non-tribal cards and makes them tribal, and then also can create elementals, which will trigger some of our other elemental synergies. So the deck is very mid-range. You do want to manage kind of ideally look at what your opponent's doing and try to find what you need to do to kind of create your win condition. So some decks, if they're aggro, that means you need to kind of put maybe a few creatures out there early, get some blocks happening. Maybe you need to control the board better. There are going to be some ways we have to wipe the board. Things like Chandra Wick and Inferno, if you can play to that, is being in and out to do 3 damage each elemental. It's like a one-sided board wipe. We have River's Rebuke as well for that same thing, to put them back on tempo so we can kind of catch up from there. If our opponent is playing more of a controlling strategy, we need to get things out early. We need to get our ramp out very early so we can start double casting as quickly as possible. Maybe our opponent's a mid-range deck. We have things like Ionize, Pact of Negation, Lightning Bolt, Chaos Warp, things that can interact with their impactful turns. And so it's kind of important with this deck specifically is that you want to be able to identify what your opponent's trying to do and then counter that. 2 cards in this deck that I think I have been incredibly impressed with, the 3-2 run I've had so far. The first being Sleep. I used to love this card when I was a kid. I thought it was super cool. That was like, I'm going to tap all my creatures, my opponent's creatures 2 turns. That's a free attack step this turn and a free attack step next turn. Might as well they played a block. And I'm like, I was so high on this card. And to be honest, against certain decks, it is basically a River's Rebuke for this deck. It lets you can really manage to get in, since you do have a lot of ways we can actually go aggro with things like Lavacan Brawler getting a huge buff, Chandra Acolyte, wrong Chandra, sorry. Chandra Novice Pyromancer can also buff our elementals. Like, we do have ways for elementals to kind of be aggro heavy, and it's just one of those things that really I felt supported that game plan, and I was a really big fan. What we're going to change, we'll leave that for now. I'll put his other art when I make another deck. Of course, he is still an elemental, so we did still put a Luna in here, because you know what, he's going to pull some good cards. And of course, put Genesis Ultimatum, because this card is just going to synergize extremely well with Omnath with putting lands into play. And so we did, of course, put in Zendikar's Royal. It creates elementals and synergies lands. So it's just another one of those cards that just, I think, really fits the deck. As we said before, Coma goes in every deck. You don't get a Jormungandr Tattoo without loving the card. And it's the reason to my few showcase styles that I really just play with a lot. I have been pretty happy with the deck. Unfortunately, I do think our weakest matchup is going to be multi-board wipe control. White-blue that has drawn multiple Cody control decks, I think that are something that we're just going to be really weak to, is we don't necessarily have the easiest time as a creature-based synergy rebuilding our board very easily. Just something to kind of think about when you're developing is you want to know when you need to stop developing as well. This is the deck. This is Omnath Elementals. On to the 4-color. Of course, we have to play the only 4-color legend known, Omnath Locust Creation. Now, I know what you're saying, and I'm already saying it myself. Okay, so we already need 34 basic lands plus a ton of MDFCs. We want to be able to hit a lot of our land drops. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're effectively running 41 lands in the deck, with a lot of ways to tutor for them and find them and things like that. We might even run more MDFCs in the future. We are playing Big Dumb Omnath. I know he's a little overplayed. I still have a lot of fun with him. I think it's an incredibly fun deck to pilot. He's just a strong card. I mean, it's the same as when he was in Standard Brawl. Like, you're just going to want to play ways to get him out early and start playing lands with him. Of course, I did include Baby Omnath in here since we are still putting lands into play. This gives us kind of like our Tatyova type effect without having to put Tatyova in here and getting to kind of have some Omnath synergy. Tatyova is probably good to put in the deck if you don't want to play Baby Omnath. That was just a choice I made to keep one or the other with my like other lands matter kind of synergy. Of course, things like Phylath also care about lands. We do, of course, want to run things like Veldar Retreat as well as our Zendikar's Royal, so that even if Omnath Locust Creation is not getting value on his own, we are still playing a lands matter deck in these 4 colors. I'm going to kind of go over what each color offers really quick. Green is our main way to get lands into play and our main way to ramp with things like Llanowar Elves, Gilded Goose, and then Reclaimer being a way to actually tutor for our Field of the Dead option as well, in addition to our Promise being there. This deck as well, we wanted to try to keep as many things that came into play untapped as possible. We only have, I want to say, looks like 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. So 7 basics. So just be very careful knowing when you're going to tutor. We don't have a ton of ways to actually tutor for specifically basic lands. Primarily, that's just going to be our Into the North and Cultivate. Into the North can actually tutor for some of our dual lands that we didn't actually end up putting in. We have a few. We have things like Arctic Tree Line that can tutor for as well. Cultivate is going to require just basics. And then, yeah, that's the basis of what green's kind of giving us, and more ways to put in mana. For instance, like Cavalier Thorns, Ulvenwald Hydra, Ashaya counts and makes Omnath count for himself immediately. White is primarily giving us good removal in the form of Banishing Light, Skyclave Operation, Rave of Revelation, and it's also giving us Veldar Retreat. Veldar Retreat really just makes this deck sing sometimes. Red is probably the color we're using the least, and it's primarily there for, again, more removal in Ancient Grudge and Rip Apart as ways to kind of deal damage to creatures as well as destroying artifacts and enchantments. Skull Smashing, and then Radha Chandra can give us more card advantage and finding ways to play stuff, and then Phylath being able to declare spell as well. So red's kind of like our not super valuable in the deck, but since we do need red mana on turn 3 or 4, we do have a good amount in the deck. Blue is primarily going to give us ways to protect ourselves, things like Pact and Negation, things like, really that's the only counterspell I put in. I didn't feel like going too hard. I did put in a Dovin's Veto as well. I didn't want to go too hard in the counterspell game and lose fight, because I think realistically we just need, maybe one Pact or Veto on an important turn, and we can just pop off from there. We do have things like Armor's Epiphany to be able to go one more time, Ancient of Treachery, Seer Restoration can help us draw more cards. And then Glassmood can actually become a copy of like a Risen Reef needed, or Llanowar Elf, or any number of things that have good ETBs or are incredibly strong in the deck once we fire enough Haymakers. And as far as multicolor spells goes, I think the most important things are probably the Mirari's Wake, Genesis Ultimatum, and those are if you get either one of those off, you are just going to go to town as far as value goes. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of ways to uniquely build Omnath right now if you want to stick with a landfall deck idea. And since I don't really have a lands matter deck at this point, I wanted to have one when playing with friends and can see what happens. So I think that it's at least good to have a deck like this. There's definitely going to be a time in the future where I'll probably try to make a 4-color deck that's just going to be I'll pick a different theme that works in the 4 colors to try to build around that. Maybe I don't even really worry about Omnath. It's not how I generally play. But with so many limited 4-color options without having any of the partner commander combinations or the original 4-color commanders that were coming out, we're really just kind of limited on what we can do. This deck, of course, is going to be very similar to a lot of tier 1 decks you're going to find with Omnath. Please compare, see what works best for you. But this is a house. I would probably say he's either the best lands matter deck tied with Tatyova or just slightly under Tatyova. Either due to the inclusion of other colors strengthening it or weakening it, kind of based on how our mana symptoms look. But that is Omnath. Okay, this deck did better than I thought. I didn't really think this deck was going to be anywhere. So I basically didn't know which Ugin I wanted to put in. So you put an 8-drop Ugin, realistically, you're going to try to farm wins by just getting to mana ramping him out and getting people to concede from there. And that's not bad, but that's not what I want to do. I never intentionally want to build a deck that's just existing to enrage my opponent. I would rather do my own thing. And if they don't like that, they can quit. But so we went with 6-drop Ugin that makes all of our other spells cost less, because it allows us to kind of storm out through the deck. And we actually kind of can storm. The main thing with this deck that we are trying to do is we want to Paradox Engine, Forsaken Monument, as well as where to go? Aetherflux Reservoir. We're storming out to get this, and we're gonna try to be in that way. Those are our main win conditions, if I had to be honest. Sure, we could potentially win through aggro with things like Metalor Colossus and Ulamog Seizes Hunger. It seems very unlikely. Those have been the 2 games I won. Have just managed to be storming out an incredible board presence after playing my Ugin in the Ineffable, and them just being like, oh. So I recommend it. I think the deck is incredibly fun. I think it's really fun to kind of do your own thing rather than focusing on destroying what your opponent's doing, which is, again, why I went with this Ugin. You can make do with pretty much anything in the color combo. The only things I think that are important that you have are Ugin, Aetherflux. Forsaken Monument's really good because it allows you to ramp. Paradox Engine allows you to combo off to some degree. And then just as many mana rocks as you can find that you think makes sense. We do have enough lands. Unfortunately, the mana base is honestly a little pricey. There's a lot of these that are rare. So just a quick heads up about that one is I think you can put basics in, but since you're running Forsaken Monument, you really don't want to. Just my 2 cents. This deck is an incredibly mythic and rare heavy, but if you do like playing colorless, it's put up results for me. A lot more than I thought it would at first. And it'll just get better as we get more stuff. Hopefully we'll get more Eldrazi in the future, and we can get more wastes or things that are, considered devoid and things like that. But this is my colorless deck. Ugin for the win. I guess 2 things kind of note that I personally think that are very good. Karn, the Great Creator, the plus can actually make some of your artifacts, so you can go aggro that way. And then Mystic Forge can allow you to kind of storm off the top of your library as well. So just a quick note. That those are 2 things to kind of watch out for. And 2, if you can, save your Sculpting Steel for when you really need it, because there's a lot of different artifacts in here to pick. It's just important, I think, you pick the right one. So with this one, I want to give a quick heads up. This is not your normal Iska Planar Bridge deck. And then as a second part, I want to give a shout out to my friend Smurfy. You might have seen him on some other things on the channel that we play together. He had the idea for this deck back when it was a 60-card version, before 100-card Brawl came out. And this is Tribal. I'm kind of using his idea because I couldn't think of a 5-color deck that hadn't already been done before, or that you've seen a lot of. And so I wanted to kind of showcase this version of the deck, which I will point out to begin with is incredibly rare and mythic heavy. Do it if you've got most of the stuff. It is an incredibly fun deck. It takes a lot to learn because there are so many different lines of play to do. But we are primarily playing Isuka, God of the Tree, over the Prismatic Bridge. We want her to be in play with enough of our cheap legendary creatures, and they will tap for mana as well as attacking. And then we're trying to effectively get out and cycle through our deck and cast a bunch of stuff. The deck is just that simple. We need to make sure to hit our mana as quickly as possible. So we do have each of the Triomes in, the World Tree, each of the Shocklands. I think, we want to have as much as we can. And of course, we are rolling Feel the Dead, Feel the Ruin. Inventor's Vera can be good too. Realistically, the main line of play you're looking for in this deck is going to be playing Paradox Engine. You're Paradox Engineing, you're playing through your stuff, you're getting effects on tap off the top of your library, in addition to tapping for mana with each of your legendary creatures. So maybe Vona's exiling stuff, and then untaps and you cast something else, or you're drawing cards off of Joyra. Selval is adding a ton of mana and then untapping. You've just got a lot of options. Maybe you're attacking and then boasting to try to find something in there. Magda can get you a ton of mana while tapping around with Iska, which is really strong. So in addition to Paradox being the important part of the deck, I also would have to say that probably the War of Invention being a way to tutor for it in addition to the Foundry. And then I like Kenrith a lot in the deck. I think Kenrith has been able to bring back enough of these that I think it seems incredibly good. Acerak can be a way in the deck too, because you don't actually use the Tomb of Annihilation in this deck. You actually go more for Dungeon of the Mad Mage or Lost Mind of Fendelver, because you'll cast, return. He can be one of your combo pieces to combo off with. And then you can just try your best to use the dungeons to clear up your next couple of turns. If your board gets wiped, you have things like Primal Glorious Rebirth, bring all your legendaries back. You have Urza's Arena Vast to board wipe your non-legendaries, and since pretty much your entire deck is, that's what you got. Captain Sisay, Coveted Prize, Varagoth, are all ways to help tutor in addition to War of Invention and Inventor's Fair. The deck can also make use of its fantastic amount of mana from just having a bunch of mana on board to spell the Ice Shaper, get more mana that way to create more or to cast from the top 4. You can also Crackle with Power to finish out the game. Certain things as well, like Casualties of War and Ruinous Ultimatum, can also just kind of like really make your opponent struggle to deal with what you have to put out. Personally, I am like 4-1 with this version of the deck right now. There is another slight version you can go with the deck where you are not quite going this like legendary tribal, and instead you're actually going more into the tribal in addition to the legendary, and you're running the Mask of Nexus in here, which after talking it out, like it seemed like he was very he didn't think it ran as well. We were splitting it too much, but that would make things like when you're tapping for Mog to make you a ton of more mana, or things like that. So there's two different routes you can kind of go with this theme of the deck. But this one has been really effective and a more refined list. And I imagine he's just going to keep working on it. It's definitely a pet project. The downside, you're going to get paired against the best of the best. You're playing Iska. You're playing 5-color in general, and I imagine that's just going to be a thing. But you really can put up with it. I think this deck just has so many lines of play you need to watch out for, and so many ways to kind of like be recursive in your threat nature. If there's one thing I would say the deck is like a little light on, is that you don't have a lot of ways to interrupt your opponent's combo. But like, so if we're weak into another person's combo deck, but strong into aggro and mid-range, and like I'd even say control, I'm pretty okay with that. Yeah, that is the deck. And with that, I hope you guys like it. Again, I would recommend this deck out if you've got a good chunk of them. The deck is incredibly fun and rewarding once you've learned it. I personally like it more when I'm playing against friends, not when my numbers come from for the 4-1 wins, though, for the testing strategy. Yeah, that is the deck. And just like that, 28 deck challenge done. One for every color combination or lack of color on MTG Arena. This has been incredibly fulfilling for me. I've really enjoyed kind of doing this. I think that it's really refined how I build decks in the future. And, it's really helped me to kind of figure out the right balance between theme and power level is, and really show me some cards that I may not have thought were that good. There's a cat licking my leg right now. I just had a lot of fun with this. I can't wait to build more decks with Historic Horizons commanders and Innistrad commanders coming out, and try to retool and come back some of these commanders as well. I really enjoy the deck crafting process, and you can be sure to see more of this. I just wanted to finish this series so I can have more flexibility with who I want to build, since I'm finding myself having some color combinations I'd already want to go back and revisit. As always, thank you so much for watching. It really means the world to me. I hope you can get some benefit out of this content. It's really important to me that I'm creating something that I think is worth watching. And so if you felt that way, please give me a like, a subscribe, leave a comment down below what your favorite deck was you saw, or if there's a deck you want me to build in the future. I'd be more than down to like take, whatever you've got on that one. But I hope you have a great week. And, I hope when Heart Gardens drops tomorrow that we are all just, get the best pulls. You get that little % chance to get those, the rare cards. As always, guys, take care and be radiant.